Good afternoon to you. Mark Sott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Monday, July the 9th, 2018. I hope your Monday is going well. Mine has been a productive day looking over a lot of information regarding the tropics, and we're going to talk about that. Monday is usually the day when I discuss the most information, and that's especially so when we're not tracking anything, but now that we are, two systems, the remnants of Beryl, and of course what is soon to be Hurricane Chris, and then actually a typhoon, a rather strong one out in the western Pacific. I'm going to talk about that too. Means that today is going to be a rather lengthy one, but at the end, as long as you are informed, maybe a little entertained, to try to make these a little bit lighthearted and not so serious all the time, then I've done my job. All right, so let's get on with it. Stop wasting time looking at me, and let's look at the graphics that we've got. I'll pop back in before all is said and done. First, let's take a look into the past. This is June the 4th, 2018, the map that we are looking at here. And I want you to watch this area right through here. This is the eastern Atlantic, most of the Atlantic basin actually, but the eastern Atlantic is what I really want you to focus on. This is the sea surface temperature anomalies map from a little bit over a month ago from the NOAA NESDA site right here. That's the source. And watch what happens when I show you what it looks like today. See that? That is a remarkable change overall. Let's go back and look again. So we're definitely filling in this area through here. The Atlantic main development region has definitely warmed considerably so since the first part of the hurricane season. And you can see that very clearly right here. You can also see how warm it is relative to average in the western part of the basin off the east coast and in the northwest Atlantic. And that is going to really start to matter here. It's mattering now with Chris taking advantage of that warmer than normal water temperature profile. And as we get towards the heart of the season, this could be a problem. So the MDR here definitely warming up. Is it going to be where it was last year? Probably not. But I saw some interesting Twitter interactions over the weekend from Eric Webb. You remember we had him on, this sort of phone a friend that I do from time to time, a little segment, if you will, where we reach out to an expert that knows a lot more than I do about certain things. And the sort of interview that we did with him a few weeks ago, we were talking about how warm the Pacific was relative to average, especially in the Pacific's version of the main development region, and how cold the Atlantic was. Well, I saw some interesting Twitter stuff from Eric this weekend that some of the EPS, the Ensemble Prediction System, see, I almost said center again, indicating a slowing of the trade winds in the tropical Atlantic, and basically he was thinking that maybe, just maybe, we see a warmer tropical Atlantic heading into August and September. And he even said this little bit of a nugget that, and he's, pretty straightforward. He's not going to, he's very objective, okay? And he said that maybe, and I'm paraphrasing here, some of those seasonal forecasts could be in jeopardy, those ones that are showing lower than normal activity. That's what I would assume from that. So we're going to keep a real close eye on that. And each week, a couple times a week, we get an update on this region of the Atlantic Basin from the NOAA NESDA site. Elsewhere across the map, you notice in the eastern Pacific a fairly sizable area of positive anomalies, but nothing that really jumps out as being particularly warmer, like where it's overwhelming, like 2015, for example. But we are warming the equatorial Pacific through here, mainly west of the Galapagos Islands. That's where the most warmth is, and it's going to take some time. And then maybe by the winter we will have an El Nino develop. Just getting rid of some of these tabs here. So another version of the sea surface temperature anomalies, and this one is from the Reynolds method, and the different methodologies that are used. This is a weekly average, and it uses a different time scale for the base state. If you're going to have something that is deviating from the normal, well, what is your sample pool to make normal, all right? And the different methodologies use different backgrounds and so forth. So This is a weekly average, whereas the other one I just showed you is a daily snapshot. And even here, especially in the eastern Atlantic up here, the AMO, the positive and negative AMO is like this horseshoe. It's off the chart here, but it kind of looks like this. And all of this, as you remember, I just showed you, was very, very cold through June, like that. Well, you can clearly see that even on this particular chart, the Reynolds method, the northeast Atlantic up here, part of the AMO pattern has now warmed, in some cases, a quarter to a half and a full degree Celsius above the long-term average. But more importantly, it's generally not below average, all right? And that's very important. See a little area right off Africa, some creeping right into the MDR through here. But overall, the Atlantic's definitely warming. And then here, too, this is going to be a problem later in the season if we get a hurricane coming up the East Coast, right along the coast. Much warmer than normal sea surface temperatures at the surface. And that extends all the way up right to the coastline here, up into the bays, and then even here into the Gulf of Maine. And, it's still just early July. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when you see that, and a hurricane comes, you have to have one before you have the other. And we do have the warm sea surface temperatures. Now we see, do we get a hurricane? And even a tropical storm could bring a lot of rainfall. So something to keep an eye on for sure as we go forward. We're about a month away, a little bit more than a month away, from really having to start to pay attention to things much closer. And I think we're going to have a little bit of a downturn of quietness, which is good, and we'll talk about that at the end. In the Gulf of Mexico, I didn't show it on the other map, but this is a little bit warmer than average, but the Gulf is always going to be warm enough to create powerful hurricanes, almost always. No real major changes so far. Now, this is interesting. The Atlantic, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say here, the western part of the Atlantic here, all of this was filled in pretty solidly with 29 Celsius. I should have left the map up from yesterday. I failed to do that. But the presence of Chris sitting out here and that strong fetch all around it, the continuous agitation of the water from the wind, definitely knocking down the sea surface temperatures just a little bit. But Chris will move off eventually to the north and east, and then these water temperatures will rebound quite significantly and very quickly. Notice, too, that the 26-degree isotherm, which is about, that's Celsius, by the way, 80 degrees Fahrenheit is about 79.5, is right up in here somewhere. It's a pretty good gradient, somewhere about like this. So it's fairly far to the north, and it's going to creep even more so than that, as you can imagine, over the next few weeks and couple months. And so, yeah, a hurricane coming up the East Coast, just as an example, wouldn't have a whole lot of real estate of colder than is needed water to work with. Just, again, you got to watch these kinds of things and have people at least pay more attention than perhaps they normally would. Not trying to get people riled up or worried, but just an awareness thing. Kind of like if you go in and your doctor says your blood pressure's just starting to get on the high side. And, oh, okay, does that mean I'm going to drop dead of a stroke tomorrow? Probably not. Very, very confident that that's not going to happen. However, start working on it so that it doesn't get any higher. That's the best analogy I can do for you today. The doctor's not trying to scare you into whatever. He's just letting you know, hey, look, your blood pressure's a little higher than normal. And in this case, these sea surface temperature anomalies are, in some areas, a lot higher than normal. 1 Celsius, 2 Celsius, 3 Celsius. We're talking several degrees Fahrenheit above the long-term average. And it may come into being a problem later in the season. All right, let's see what's out there now. We do have a couple of problems. They are not major. But remember, I am not going to just, if it's not a hurricane, I don't care. Here's your advisory. Have a nice day. I'm also not going to pump something up that is more than what it is. But we need to look at what is out there very objectively. And part of my research and observation work over the past 22 years or so has shown me that people generally don't understand what they're dealing with when a tropical system comes their way. A depression, a storm, a hurricane, and then the various categories. They think wind, That grabs the headlines. Storm surge, more and more becoming mainstream sort of talking points. And then the other hazards just kind of get brushed aside, not on purpose. And the media and people on social media do a good job of talking about the other hazards. But that wind speed, 185 miles per hour or 40 miles per hour, those two extremes, people look at them and they think completely different things, forgetting that both the 40 mile per hour and the 185 mile per hour cyclone are generating waves, obviously one bigger than the other, clearly, but those waves radiate out, as an example here from Chris, towards the coastline, and they create rip currents, especially during the time of low tide. And I hammer this because I don't like people dying from tropical storms and hurricanes. To be selfish about it, it diminishes the market share, right? I mean, come on, it's like other industries that create products that kill their customers. We won't go into that, but you know what I'm talking about. I don't create hurricanes, but I don't want hurricanes to kill people. I want people to be aware, and I want them to be able to, like I said, if I want to be selfish about it, use me as a product. And if you're dead, you can't. And so I want to have you around, all right, and keep you safe. And if you don't understand what's out there, it could be a big problem. So with that little soapbox out of the way, let's take a look at the latest on Chris from the 11 o'clock advisory. Knocking on the door of becoming a hurricane. At that time, winds were 60. Whoops, try again. Winds were 60 miles per hour, and it was moving very slowly, but eventually it will start to take off to the north and east and eventually impact directly parts of Atlantic Canada or the Canadian Maritimes up through here. To the extent of what those impacts will be, stay tuned. It's hard to say. Water temperatures in this area are cold, but the Gulf Stream does extend fairly far to the north. And if we go back and look at that, this is where I was talking about it mattering. There's the north wall of the Gulf Stream right there. And it kind of loops back around. And so you've got some fairly warm water. Still a pretty good distance away, though. It drops off really quickly. And then these purples, that's cold. So what will happen is Chris will transition from a tropical cyclone where all the wind and energy is presumably concentrated around its warm core. Where it gets up here, that'll spread out, and it'll be a larger storm with a larger wind field affecting a larger aerial extent, but the winds will be generally lower, probably with heavy rain, and it'll be colder. I'm assuming that it's much colder in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia than it is in eastern North Carolina, as an example. All right, so just be aware of that if you're up in that region. And we'll talk about some of the coastal impacts for the Carolinas and elsewhere in just a moment. Not going to leave that alone. I'm going to make sure people are aware until the threat is gone. Meanwhile, the remnants of Beryl, kind of holding its own, some trying to form something kind of tendrils right here. Puerto Rico getting some very heavy rain. Some of that rainfall moved through this area. And that's what I was talking about yesterday, that even though this was diminished, it's still going to bring, despite the classification, what we call it doesn't matter. It's still going to bring these effects, heavy rain, gusty winds, and looking at the reports on social media and elsewhere, plenty of tropical storm conditions, generally speaking, across a good swath of this region last night through today as Beryl's remnants, the remnant circulation of what was once a hurricane, moved through. And now we have some pretty heavy rainfall in Puerto Rico, and we can see that on the new state-of-the-art Doppler radar that they finally got put back up. Congratulations to the team that did that. And you can see a good deal of the island here getting some soaking rain. Hopefully it's not too heavy. Some areas this will be problematic because you still have a vulnerable structure, the geography and the geology of that area. After a major hurricane, you're going to have less, what am I trying to say here? You're going to have more ability to flood because of, dead trees and trees that are knocked down. It's not the same as when you have burn scars, but this is not necessarily, obviously, a good thing, although you need the fresh water. The threat of flash flooding is there, and so hopefully people are taking precautions, however that can be. With those hills and valleys, though, that can be tough, and we saw absolutely catastrophic, off the scale. I talked about this in my 2017 documentary. Unbelievable, literally like, sci-fi movie type flash flooding during Maria when it passed through. Just those different flood gauges were like this, and then they just spiked to beyond records. It was just absolutely frightening. So hopefully nothing like that, and this will move on through. But nevertheless, parts of the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands clearing out, but Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, the U.S. side still having some inclement weather. And then this will move on through, and we'll see where it ends up in a few days. Just going real quick back to the home page of the Hurricane Center, we'll point this out. The 5-day indicating maybe some redevelopment of Beryl off the southeast coast, but the upper pattern generally looking like everything's moving kind of like this. There are plenty of buses to catch, as I like to say from time to time, and this is the passenger down here. Beryl later on, if it regenerates, will catch the bus in the upper level flow and head out pretty much the same as Chris did. And yes, if this comes up and redevelops up here and becomes a tropical storm again, or even a hurricane or whatever, its name would still be Beryl, because it's the soul of Beryl left over still right there. That's still Beryl. All right, moving on to Chris. Almost a hurricane. You can see a very well-defined center right in there somewhere, banding around the CDO, trying to get more compact and concentrated. And then the lower level clouds you can see swirling all the way back to the Carolina coast, including right over my office, which is right in there. And this is sending waves, okay? Lots of waves emanating out from this system towards the coastline, and as such, there are problems associated with that. And I'm, encouraging you until the risk is gone. Please share this. Let people know, oh, you're headed to the beach with the family? You got to make sure they stay out of the water. The entire coast, for the most part, of North Carolina is at risk for it's a high risk of rip current. See, right there. High risk. So basically look at this and say, this is bad. It's deadly, and it can kill you. And it has done so with a gentleman up in the Kill Devil Hills area, unfortunately, over the weekend. So please, 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 please keep this in the back of your mind. This is an interesting infographic. If you see these flags right here, these red flags, come on now. Look, if they had one up, I'm going to climb on the soapbox just for a second. I think that the flags up north in Massachusetts that I've heard about are purple when there are sharks. And maybe down south it's for jellyfish. I got to research that, but I know I saw Eric Fisher talking about that up in Boston, that the purple flags flying at the beach mean that there are sharks present. I'm assuming maybe the great whites up there are the biggest problems, obviously. So if you saw, assuming that I'm correct about this, purple flags, and that's what that means, oh, sharks, you would stay out of the water. You'd be like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to go maybe up to my shins, and that's it. I know I would, because I'm not going in the food chain any more than I have to, right? And we know, that it's a very small chance that you would get attacked. But if you're not in the water, it's a 0 chance. I have yet to see a shark running around on the land outside of some crazy movie. So the same is said for rip currents. Rip currents are not going to come and get you. You have to go to where they are, and that's the beach. So when you see those red flags, like the one right down there, please don't ignore that. Think of that as shark, okay? Red flag means shark, sort of. It's not, but you get the point. Red is bad at stop. We don't use red as go and whatever. It's green. And when you see green flags at the beach, that's 2 thumbs up. Enjoy the beach. But until then, oh my goodness, if you see those red flags, just assume it's not safe and stay out of the water, okay? And you know what else? You're going to put the people down here. These ladies and gentlemen that come out and rescue your butt from that. You don't want to put them at risk. I mean, they're trained, and they may have jet skis and float devices, but they could get swept out too. So please, please, please. And this is not just for the eastern part of North Carolina. It's also for my neck of the woods. A little less so for Brunswick, Horry, Georgetown counties, and farther south. But still, the risk is there. And honestly, I care. I do. Maybe it's because I'm a dad of 7. Did he say 7? Yes. And, you know, all the people that watch, there's over 12,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel. People watch this video, and, you know, I want you around, all right? So, what else do we have? I know I have another, whoops, I accidentally opened Chrome. Let's wait for that to go away. I was trying to click on this because I've got a very special graphic to show you. There it be. So out in the western Pacific, this is Typhoon Maria. Why? Why is it called Maria? Well, they don't use alphabetical names there, apparently, and it was already chosen, and it's just, I won't say it's unfortunate because nobody did it on purpose, but, you know, maybe after this year, the World Meteorological Organization, they can just take the name Maria off of all basins lists, and that'll be that. And we'll never have a tropical cyclone named Maria. Again, that notwithstanding, here it is. Very well defined, strong typhoon. It was a super typhoon. Recently, they designated at that, what is that? That label, that moniker, I can't remember, is it above 150? Something like that. But it was a Cat 5 equivalent at one point. And remember, typhoons are exactly like hurricanes. They're just in a different basin. There's no difference. They can be larger and stronger because they have more warm ocean to work with out here, a vast area compared to the Atlantic. But otherwise, they are the same exact phenomenon as a hurricane. So where is Maria headed? Generally speaking, through the southern islands of, what do they call it, the Ryukyu Islands or something like that, Miyakojima somewhere. I don't know this part of the world that well, although I am considering, as the typhoon season goes on, brushing up on my geography for that area, and that's all I'm going to say about that. You'll see. I think the time has come, put it that way. We're going to talk about that later, but there's your first hint. Nevertheless, not for this one, though. This one's headed west-northwest, probably staying just north of Taiwan, Taipei sitting up here, and then eventually making landfall at mainland China. And it'll be a formidable event. There are a few chasers down here in the path of Maria, and depending on when it strikes, they may have some dramatic video. Kind of need daylight for the, you know, make the best of it, and we will wish them the best. I don't think Morgerman's out there. He might be. I saw on Twitter that he's on assignment working on a TV production in London, and so I don't know if he'll make it for Typhoon Maria or not. That would be interesting if he did. Josh Morgerman, iCyclone, he would be in 2 Marias in less than a year. That'd be quite a feat. All right, how about the Atlantic Basin? And we'll end on a good note here. No activity, more than likely, over the next week to 10 days outside of what we've already got. Maybe something that tries to develop off the southeast coast again. That seems to be sort of the homegrown garden spot, but I don't see anything that jumps out at me just yet. And with the Madden-Julian oscillation, what does all of this mean? This just tells me that the favored upward motion of the atmosphere is not in our part of the world, which is right there, at least most of us, right? Western Hemisphere and Africa, no MJO activity where we are, and that is, yes, MJO activity through the maritime continent and eventually over towards the Western Pacific. And as such, the typhoon season over there will be rather robust, I guess. All right, so one more time from me. Pretty long today, but we covered a lot, and I think I'm done. Chris, again, heading out, Canadian Maritimes. We'll see what happens up there. We'll focus on those impacts more as the week goes on. And, of course, I'll be watching the remnants of Beryl, but I'm not seeing any indications in the long-range guidance that even if it does develop, again, it'll stay offshore. It should stay well offshore. And, of course, those rip currents, I want you to stay safe. So stay out of the water if you see those red flags. My wife and kids are down at the beach as I speak, and I told them more times than you can imagine, I don't want the kids going past their ankles down there, okay? And they're going down to Mason's Inlet and staying pretty much out of the breaking waves anyway. The tide pools and things like that back at the inlet, that's a much safer bet. All right, have a great rest of your Monday. Thanks as always for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.